Welcome to this session of the meetup, Frederick Linux Users Group. I'm Preston Broussard, and I'm from Microsoft, and I'd like to talk today about how Microsoft has been embracing open source. Now, I realize the actual title of the meetup is Microsoft's Changing Approach to Open Source Technologies, but I'd like to qualify that, if I may, to say that it's no longer changing. It has changed. I've been with Microsoft from early 2015, actually December 2014, and in this over 3.5-year period, I can't recall where our position was, we're changing. It's always been, by then we have already adopted. It's been picking up since then, and right now, as a matter of fact, there's an article, I believe 26 or 27 September, there are more Linux workloads or non-Microsoft workloads in Azure compared to Microsoft operating systems. So I think that's pretty significant when you think about it. So I'm putting the slide up here just so that you have my contact information. After the presentation, you're welcome to, I have it in PDF form, and I'll turn that over. You'll have it available on the meetup site. So that's a little bit about, oh, right, so Microsoft, over 3.5 years, and my background is primarily on the infrastructure side. Mostly what I do nowadays, however, is I teach PowerShell workshops, but I have a strong interest in open source technology with Microsoft as well. So the slide, let me change that. Okay. So the slides I have here is from our recent Ignite a couple of weeks ago. That was in Orlando, and if you've already seen it, just bear with me. But if you haven't, then I'll go through the impetus, not the impetus so much, but the evidence of how we have adopted and embraced open source technologies. And as part of the material we'll get today, I'll have it uploaded, is the video, the actual Ignite video, and the experts, the program managers, they gave an excellent demonstration of some of the features, as well as they presented the same video, but they are way more knowledgeable than I am, and they do a better job. So, you know, what I can do today is, in addition to presenting the slides, just give you my experience with open source technologies in Azure. So. And having some trouble with the slides here, so please bear with me. Let me bring this back up because I had two open. Okay. Yeah, it's coming out. I have to close and reopen the slide, so let's make sure it comes back on the screen for us. And then there, presentation mode. Okay, there we go. And then test my little clicker as well. Excellent. Right. So, from Ignite, we have the title here is to build and manage your enterprise-grade solutions or Linux solutions, right? How we adopt and embrace these solutions in Azure. If you watch the video, the program manager is Boris Irish, and he did a pretty good job. So we'll talk about the momentum around open source and in Azure specifically, and at some demos. I may not be able to show you all the demos that Boris showed you, but I could probably go through a few items from my own knowledge and delivering open source integration with Azure for other customers before. And then the resources you'll always get. So this is Boris, he's the one that gave the talk at Ignite. I'm just presenting on behalf of leveraging his work. So a lot of Fortune 500 use our cloud. That kind of goes without saying. And our mentality, our there's a shift in focus since Satya Nadella became the CEO in 2014, right, is to embrace open source technologies. If you think about it from an economic perspective, if you have a platform, right, and you have your own operating system, that's fine. But if the goal is to drive consumption of workloads and to expand your market share and help more customers, our mantra is to help organizations and individuals achieve more. We can't accomplish that unless we change our view of who's allowed. Change our view from being competitive to being more collaborative with these other technologies. So that's the whole mentality that we have now since Satya Nadella took over as CEO. So in general then, we love open source. If you look at the timeline, some significant events, that's Git, and so that's more developer oriented. And my background, by the way, is more on the infrastructure side. Officially stating that we love Linux, right? VS Code is what there's nothing you can't do nowadays with VS Code. Whether you're strictly an open source developer or .NET developer, that tool is great for pretty much anything. So a lot of powerful tools and capabilities there. PowerShell Core 2016, I think it was about August 18th, we released PowerShell Core as an open source contribution to GitHub, where you can now run PowerShell on Linux, in addition to things like PowerShell or desired state or Linux desired state configuration. Not to mention integrating that in Azure using Azure automation accounts and desired state configuration on Linux, right? So that was pretty significant in 2016. 2017, we have our own Azure Kubernetes service, right? It's a platform that we host these containers on. I think Brandon Burns, right? He was a Google employee before. He's now a Microsoft employee. So that's where a lot of that impetus came from. And right, so here in 2018, VS Code picked up some momentum, and now it's considered the #1 developer tool. I know this is sort of an eye chart, but bear with me here. We've been contributing to the Linux kernel for 9 years, right? So that's the significance. That's the message we want to drive here, and then we've expanded our portfolio to support open source technologies. This one has a strong interest. If you're interested in iOS IoT technologies, Azure Sphere is another good recent addition to our portfolio. So Ignite was the week of 24 September, and by 26 or 27 September, just a few days after Ignite started, incidentally, is when the number of the operating systems in Azure surpassed the Microsoft operating system, the Windows operating system. So I thought that was pretty significant. So you'll see where it says nearly 50%, but by the end of that conference, it was over 50% of workloads. And we have these marketplace images. This is where third-party vendors and even ourselves, this is where we host our images that you can provision in Azure. So instead of trying to decide if you have a Red Hat workload on premises or CentOS and you want to customize it so it can be hosted in Azure, you would have to do that. There's a process to upload, but you can just go straight into Azure and launch it from Azure. That's part of our image library, right? Just launch it from the marketplace. And 60% of those are Linux-based, of our entire what we have in the marketplace are Linux-based. Some customers that we have some success stories with: Johnson Controls, Siemens. You can imagine these guys are going to be probably interested in the IoT solutions coming up with Azure Sphere, and some others here. All right, so in the industry, we're claiming that for a single instance virtual machine, just a single instance, you can imagine no redundancy as far as the virtual machine is concerned, yet we can offer 99.9% SLA, and that's because of the storage services that we have that, behind the virtual machines, and we have synchronous triplicate replication inside a particular data center, and now we have even replication across zones within a region. A region consists of multiple data centers. So because of that redundancy, if you're using a certain type of storage, which is premium storage, by the way, not hard drives, they're typical spinning hard drives, but SSD drives, we can offer 99.9% SLA. That's an industry only. That's what we offer in the only we offer that in the industry right now. And then if you think of things like availability sets, that's where you have two machines that offer the same role. So if you have a couple of CentOS systems, that's front-facing, a small web farm, and so they're the same role. Put them in the same availability set, and it isolates the different fault domains depending on which rack it's in. The service, the fabric, the Azure fabric, will automatically detect where everything is and ensure that they're not placed when you provision them, that the virtual machines are placed on different hosts in different racks to eliminate a single point of failure, for example. And there are also update domains. So that's availability sets. We offer 99.9%. And then when you talk about availability zones, I just touched on that a little bit, but add to that availability zone redundancy, where you have multiple availability zones. This is showing 3 availability zones, for example, within a particular region, because remember, a region consists of multiple data centers. So each of these zones would represent a different data center, and you have some more redundancy there. We can go all the way up to 99.99% SLA. That's what we can offer. When you think about regions, we have globally 54 regions and counting. And that's more than our other competitors, not going to call any names, our other competitors combined. When you add the top 3 cloud providers, the other 2, you add up the regions that they have and support, a number of data center, a number of servers. It's more. So we have a pay-as-you-go model. So if you're doing high-performance computing, and you just need to calculate the trajectory of a NASA, a space shuttle or missiles or whatever. You might, or you're trying to simulate the airflow when you're building a car, the airflow, and then make adjustments. Oh, the designers, let me adjust the coefficient of drag to such and such. That requires a lot of computing power, and it's very expensive. If you were to try to host that in your on-premises environment, that might be prohibitive, but you can borrow some time from us and just use pay-as-you-go. So in terms of a cost model, it's now, there's not much capital cost there. It's no capital cost. It's just operational cost, right? So OpEx versus CapEx. You can even reserve virtual machine instances. So if you know that, okay, I want to lower my cost, and I know that I'm in this for the long haul, I'm going to reserve these particular instances for these roles, for this part of my infrastructure in Azure for a 3-year period at least. I mean, we're committed now, right? And that would lower your cost overall. You get a pretty good discount. You can have a reserve for 1 year or 3-year periods, and you get the discounts accordingly.
You're using them the whole time?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so low priority VMs, maybe there are certain jobs that or certain activity you want from your virtual machines that aren't that important. Maybe you're just doing dev test, you're trying to kick the tires and learn how things work. You can use low priority VMs for that, and they cost less because they're discounted also. So you have all these options that aims to reduce your cost overall depending on your usage. And so we have all of these offerings, pretty much all of the services that we offer. It's sort of like operating system agnostic nowadays, right? What automation accounts. It doesn't have to be the Windows operating systems in Azure that can use an automation account. Your Linux workloads can do that too. So these are just services that we try to make agnostic as possible in terms of the platform it supports in Azure. HD Insight for big data, app service for web applications, functions, Azure Functions. That's like Azure Functions. OpenShift. We have a strong partnership now with Red Hat And with Red Hat, we'll see in the upcoming slides anyway, so I'm going to say that. I'll talk a little bit more about how we integrate for supporting Red Hat images. Right, so if you consider the life cycle of any workload, right, you want to, you're going to first, maybe you're migrating, you want to make sure it's secure, you protect it with backup and disaster. We have industry-leading methods of backing up and recovering virtual machines that already sits as native to the Azure platform that doesn't require any manage agents. Well, there's an agent in the background, but you don't have to interact with it. It's part of the agent that's there already to support those Azure workloads. And monitor, we have a lot of monitoring capabilities. You do your configuration, things like automation and scripting. That's where we tie into like the automation account and update management, whether it's Windows or Linux. Again, we try to be, we have a different solution, an implementation for Linux, of course, but the idea is, hey, tell us what your end result, what your goal is. I want to keep my machines updated, and we have mechanisms to do that, whatever the platform. So any platform, any location in 54 regions globally, we're there. And then, we have some policies and controls around governance, right? Whether it's role-based access control for security or Azure policies, where you can say, hey, my organization is just in Western Europe, and because of GDPR or whatever, I want to make sure all my engineers are not capable of maybe even accidentally deploying something to another region outside of my defined geopolitical region, for example, because then you get into these complex, laws. All right, and so what about tooling? We have support. We have. If it's one thing we're good at, right, is tools for development. We're good at security too, but tools for development is something else. We have an entire pipeline, and again, going back to using things like VS Code, or so VS Code and the whole Azure DevOps, which was recently renamed from Visual Studio Team Services, or VSDS Online, right? Integration with GitHub. We are in. I don't know if it's finalized. We're in the process of acquiring GitHub, anyway. So you build, test, deploy. That whole CI/CD pipeline we support. And what we're showing here on the left-hand side is the Azure Cloud Shell. The Azure Cloud Shell is a tool that you can use when you log into your subscription in Azure that's web-based. That's one way you can use it. Just click on the little icon. It's web-based, and it provides for you, it spins up in the background a container that hosts the Azure CLI, and you can use those libraries. It's actually written in Python, by the way. You can use those libraries in Bash, in a Bash interface, to interact with the Azure platform to spin up your Linux workloads. And they don't have to be Linux workloads just because you have that interface in Bash. You can use it to spin up Windows workloads too. And also, because it's a Bash interface, once it's spun up, you can stay right there and do your SSH connection to your Linux instance after you spin it up. So it's a there's no tools that's required, but that's another option. If you wanted to download the Azure CLI tool on your native client, on your machine locally, you have that option as well. Because what if you prefer, for whatever reason, you're going to have your VS Code here, and then maybe you have a little directory for your SSH keys, and then your whatever your shell scripts are hosted. That way you can interact with it locally. So we give you both options. And by the way, the Azure CLI, notice it, I don't know if you can see that from here, but it says Bash in the upper left-hand corner. For those of you, I know this is Linux-based, but just to let you know, you can switch that to PowerShell, and it supports PowerShell too, without having to download anything locally. And so we have all these distros available. These are considered our endorsed images that you'll see that are available from our marketplace that you can push out natively, when you're in your subscription. In addition, if you have any of these images on premises, there is a process that you can go through to prepare those local images for a subsequent upload to Azure. You put it in the storage account. From the storage account, you can launch it and create it. So it's going to be, in other words, a customized image that you have on premises. So we're not saying that, hey, you have the specialized image and it's really hard to maybe, for whatever reason, it might be hard to reproduce and build from scratch in Azure. If you want to just do lift and shift, you have that option as well. And even, but so these are endorsed, which just means supported images, right? Red Hat integrated support. Okay, so let me tell you about Red Hat integrated support. We have Red Hat support engineers that reside in our same building in Redmond. We work side by side with them. When there's a problem with a Red Hat customer and they call into support, we can walk over to their queue. Our engineers can walk over to their engineers and vice versa, and we collaboratively troubleshoot it. There's some thresholds and some policies, sort of a process that we go through to try to determine whether it's really Azure related or Red Hat related, but it's not like we just, oh, it's not our problem. But it used to be, it's not, some vendors might say, it's not our problem, oh, go interact with this vendor, but now we have a stronger, tighter integration. They're physically sitting next to us to offer that support. And in addition, when you build a Red Hat image in Azure, there's a tie-in. We use we have a federation with Red Hat support, and you'll see that option when you create your image. That will give you, let's say you don't already have a Red Hat account, but you have an Azure account, and you spin up a Red Hat image. You have the option to say, okay, integrate with Azure, right? And so you're giving permission for Red Hat support to contact Azure. To exchange information. This way, when the Red Hat engineers are troubleshooting stuff, they already have that information that's fed from the Azure part, and vice versa. So that's the strength of our integration for support. Right. So if you already have, let's say, Red Hat Cloud, I think it's Cloud Access, Red Hat Cloud Access, or a subscription for Red Hat, you get a discount, or whatever you have for on-premises, you get a discount when you install an image. You can use it, in other words, you can use your Red Hat subscription in order to get a discount for the images that you're going to deploy in Azure. And we have tight collaboration, not just with Red Hat, but the other distributions as well, SUSE and the others here. Let's see. Going back, well, let's just have SUSE on this slide, but all the other distros we have, and canonical, Ubuntu. So if you look at our open source portfolio, if you check out these categories here on the left for DevOps, all of those are available. So it's got, some of it, of course, are really different vendors, but the integration that we have supports all of them. So that's what we want to show you there, and more for the developers, your application frameworks, database folks, and infrastructure, as you see. Yeah, again, some of the distributions that we support. I'll pause here, see if there's any questions so far. I know I've been talking for a while.
I always have the same question. What's under the hood? What are you guys actually running for the Azure infrastructure itself? Not necessarily the workloads you're hosting, but is it a Windows-based architecture?
It's based on, so it's a customized, because we're talking cloud scale, of course. So think of Hyper-V. It's similar technology. It's based on Hyper-V. I'll just say that. Yeah, we use, but there's more tooling, and it's got to accommodate a larger scope because it's data center scale. So it's
but
based
it's still
on
a Windows kernel basically inside the Azure infrastructure. Or?
No, it's going to be Windows based because it's based on Hyper-V, which is Windows based. I know Hyper-V is the layer above, but it's all based on Windows technology. All right, licenses. Yeah, this just on the legal side. We have this particular protection for customers to protect them from, another entity might say to one of our customers, hey, that's copyright, that's that's intellectual property, and we have a strong legal representation on. We have strong legal representation on behalf of our customers to protect from that. So, and I'm not a legal expert, so that's about all I can say about it. It's, talking about patents and intellectual property and things like that. But we have protection for those use cases, for those situations. So what would a migration journey look like? Well, first, of course, you're on premises, you're assessing your environment. I've got so many CentOS, I've got so much Red Hat, whatever. You have all of these options at your disposal. If it's a new customer, we find that a lot of new customers, initially the easiest or the lowest hanging fruit is what? To just lift and shift. You already have all your applications packaged on your system, and what I talked about before, you have a custom image. Maybe you're going to prepare that custom image and then migrate it, just transfer it to that storage account in Azure, from which you're going to deploy it as a new image, right? As a new customized image, something like that. So that's the lift and shift scenario. Refactor, if you have the development staff in-house to do something like refactoring the application, you might consider to refactor it, and instead of like maybe hosting a MySQL server in Azure from a virtual machine, maybe you can use some of our PaaS services, and the developers would know how to do that refactoring, right? Then identity gets involved and a bunch of other stuff. Or re-architect. You could say, well, okay, yeah, across the board, whatever infrastructure I have on premises, at a wider scale, you're going to do something similar. You're going to say, I want them to all use PaaS services, or you could decide maybe Azure Service Fabric, or what, Azure Functions, right? Which is going to be like one of those sort of a serverless technology, right? Between virtual machines and those serverless options like Azure Functions and Service Fabric, maybe you have some experience already. Maybe your staff has some experience in containers, right? So containers is sort of a middle ground between, and then you could leverage something like Azure Kubernetes services. So you have all of those options available for re-architecting. And then rebuilding, you might say, you know what, because of the level of effort, and we have the staff that they already know about deploying resources with what, Terraform or ARM templates, Azure ARM templates, or PowerShell script or Bash or whatever, to automatically perform these deployments. However you build your servers on premises, of course that's going to change when you build it in Azure, but the point is we have all of these methods, these tools, these capabilities where you can still automate provisioning of these individual machines or an entire infrastructure as desired. And then after that, after you get past this phase, then you think about optimizing, right? I'm not going to cover this in depth. I know it's sort of an eyesore, but basically, if you're on premises, consider which version of Linux you have. Is it the latest version? Because it's a better policy to support the latest version. Or if it's even supported, Solaris no longer exists. There are customers that asked us, hey, we have Solaris. How do we get that into Azure? And they were fairly new to it, so we had to say, well, that's not a supported and endorsed image. You have to consider, using the same services, but just host it somewhere else. Maybe test it out first in your environment before you actually deploy. So define your workload, monitor your applications. We have a lot of mechanisms to monitor your applications. And to monitor your infrastructure at various levels, at the operating system level and applications, right? And then you think about governance. So all these are some principles, just some best practices for any, not even specific to Linux, but some of the stuff is something that you probably already do in your on-premises environment that are just good practices. Right, so drilling down into some of the more detailed parts of the process to prepare an image to be hosted in Azure if you're going to build a custom image from on-premises, right? UUIDs, you have to make sure that you just whatever disk that you want. If you have a data disk attached to it, check out your FSTab, make sure everything matches up. maybe don't have like static IP addresses, because once it's deployed in Azure, the way IP addresses get assigned is technically through DHCP, but it's like a long reservation for maybe 20 years or so, or yeah. So the serial console port, right? There's some things you have to do in the boot in the grub configuration. And then you can use Cloud Init to automate the provisioning too. That's just another option if you're familiar with Cloud Init already. So firewalls, yeah, that has to be that may have to be modified too. I don't remember all the details around the firewalls, but of course, like having port 22 available by default. When you spin up a brand new marketplace image, that's like CentOS or any of those Linux distributions, it's going to have port 22 open when it spins up first of all. And then make sure that you don't have a root account that's enabled, because when you spin it up from Azure, the same thing. You have an additional user account that has to-do rights, but it's not a root account itself.
And at one time, Amazon had like restrictions on multicast traffic and things like that. Is that still the case? Like, so do you guys also restrict UDP multicast?
That part I don't recall anything about multicast in the configuration when you're preparing it. But the good news is our documentation recently has been so expansive and very extensive. So any information like that, there's actually a document that walks you through the exact, how to prepare these images for uploading. So that would have the details you need. Okay, so the demos part, this is. And the demos and the links, so you'll have all these references as well, and some resources. I can demo a few things here, but it won't be the same as if you watch the video. So make sure you watch the video. One thing I want to point out here, and you'll see in the video, this reference down here to serial console. So the serial console it used to be that before we introduced a serial console to workloads, you were not able, you could only connect to your instance using that SSH connection, right? And so then what happens if maybe you were doing something on that system, you accidentally configure the IP tables or whatever happened to port 22 and you get disconnected, then you'd be out of luck. You'd still be able to go back into the Azure platform, the portal, and do things like maybe attach it to another instance, right, that has a healthy SSH connection. You could attach it as a secondary drive to a separate instance and then boot it up, and then if it's something that you can fix just with the hard drive. For example, if the FS tab file got corrupted, that's one thing we could do. Nowadays, and to see the actual boot process, we have a serial console, so that's a separate connection that doesn't have any dependency on that IP address-based, SSH connection. That you can see when it's booting up, you can interact with it, and that was a pretty good demo too. So when you watch the slide, that's available now. Okay, so evaluation and some other details. Right, we talked about the IP intellectual property stuff. Just some testimony from some of our customers, right? How it's helped them out. Okay, so let's say you have a bunch of data to migrate. We now have these physical devices that will ship to you. Let's say you had 100 terabytes of information that you wanted to get out of your on-premises data center. Maybe they're the VHD, so you've gone through the process of whatever, even if you're running on a different virtualization platform like VMware, you can actually convert it to VHD. That's what's compatible in Azure. Convert it to VHD, and you order these data blocks. You just start the process, and you can easily do that just contacting support through the portal. It's pretty seamless. We'll ship that to you. You transfer your data. The data is secured. It's secured at rest. And that's just a smaller version, but the idea is, yeah, you can transfer it. You can ship the data to us after you transfer it here. Send it to our data center, one of our data centers, and we'll ingest it into your storage account for your subscription, and then you can use it that way.
This is hilarious. There used to be a metric way back in the day where Was it more efficient to use the network or ship a suitcase full of CDs? Which had the highest throughput? This is the suitcase full of CDs.
Well, this is a little better than a whole bunch of CDs. All you have to do is plug it in nowadays. It's just one device, right? But no, some people, that's the trade-off. That's the decision you have to make. Because yes, you don't have to do this. You can actually upload your images, like I was discussing before. So you got to reach, at some point, you may reach that threshold to make that decision. All right, so we've got some flexible migration options where they want to ship your data that way. And Azure Hybrid benefit, right? Some of the distributions you have on premises, you can use that towards spinning up images and getting a discount. So it depends on whatever relationship you have with your vendor and what you've purchased so far. You can leverage that. And we offer migration services. So let's say a customer wants to, like that use case I was talking about, Solaris, and dude, Solaris doesn't exist anymore. Decide which distribution you want to host. I think that went with Red Hat eventually. But we don't have that ego anymore to say, okay, we'll help you and don't talk to anybody else. We have partners. So if for whatever reason that customer wants to work with a partner, one of our partners, to get them into Azure, that doesn't bother us at all, right? Because once they get into Azure, we'll make sure that they're happy, and and we have that relationship. We develop that rapport at that point. So it's just, all you have to do is say, okay, this is my problem. This is my intent. I want to do a migration. How can you help us? We'll look at it, and if we have the resources, or we think it's feasible from the resources we have, we'll say, okay, we can help you. And even if we do have the resources, but let's say the customer already has developed a relationship with one of our partners, or even if it's not one of our partners, it doesn't matter. We'll build a relationship with that new partner. Maybe they will eventually become our partner. It doesn't matter, but we'll support the customer's decision to use whatever resources to get migrated, right? That's how we look at it. Yeah, and so we have tools that could help with migration, right? It can do an assessment on premises and gives you some recommendations and say, okay, well, maybe the VM, based on the characteristics, the properties of this particular workload you have on premises, we're going to recommend a certain instance size of virtual machine in Azure. And not only that, when you do the migration, let's say you have all your instances, maybe you're doing a lift and shift operation. Once you're up there, we have these tools, the Azure Advisor, right, that will give you recommendations based on performance. It will give you security recommendations, because it looks at the information that based on what you've deployed already, and it knows best practices. So it's using machine learning, and it knows trends. It looks at what you have and what could be and what you could probably optimize, look for any gaps, and gives you those recommendations as well. So nowadays, that eliminates the requirement for us, even like some of our staff, engineers and consultants, to come in and say, okay, yeah, well, only I can do this. No, a lot of this stuff is even self-service. Once you get those workloads into Azure, there's a lot of things that you can do on your own to gain some insights. If you're just learning, of course, maybe you'll need a little extra help from us to say, okay, well, this is to help interpret it, or to give you more options just with a person. Some people prefer that, but or to supplement what Azure Advisor can do. But you have those options, after all. And Azure Site Recovery. So Azure Site Recovery means that on premises, you have your workloads, whether it's running on a Microsoft-based virtualization platform or not. So Hyper-V, Virtual Machine Manager, or VMware, it doesn't matter, but it gives you the ability to recover your infrastructure or a subset of your infrastructure to Azure. You can recover to Azure, you can recover to another data center, but that's orchestrated by Azure, but the data path doesn't go up to Azure, right? It goes side to side, just the orchestration path goes to Azure. And the cool thing about Azure Site Recovery is it's used for recovery primarily. However, you can leverage the functions and the features of ASR to do, guess what? Anybody? A migration. You can use it to do a migration. So within the first 30 days, you'll get that opportunity for free. So as long as whatever you're doing is within that 30-day time window, you can do say that you want to protect your resources. You'll have a copy of it in Azure, and then you can decide, okay, that will be my migration. I've done it within 30 days, and now all my workload is in Azure. Let's do whatever we need to do at after the migration occurs to make those the act of doing the switch over, website endpoints, all that sort of stuff. And now you've migrated, right? So you can use that option as well to accelerate your migration. And then we even have like database migration services as well. That's one of the capabilities. And it's not just SQL. It's with these other databases that we support. So these are some of our ISVs that we have partnerships with that can help with the migration as well. And some of our success stories with these companies, Allscripts, JB Hunt, to name a couple. And this just goes over some of the size and what they're used for, the typical use cases. So entry-level virtual machines, it's going to be the A series or the A version 2 series. B for burstable, right? General purpose nowadays. A typical machine you want to deploy, you can use something like a D series version 3. So the irony here is that even though, initially this is what we introduced, so this was the first in the D series, but that's D series version 2, like with Moore's Law, you're getting really more capacity for less cost, even if you're going up the version scale. Some people might believe initially it may imply that, version 3, it must have the latest and greatest features, which it does, so it must be more expensive, but that's not always necessarily the case. These are memory optimized series VMs, and these are graphics intensive and so on and so on, so you get the idea. Storage optimized are L series. So with Azure Migrate, and we have all these migration options, and we have all of these platforms and languages, Kubernetes for container stuff. Our tight integration with RHEL and OpenShift, right? For if it's going to be containerized. These different databases that we support, all of this, and to migrate your data itself, you can leverage some of the import-export services that we offer, like Azure Data Box nowadays. Right, so I've already talked about our strategic partnership between Red Hat, that we have with Red Hat. So, and run this one. I looked away for a second there. This is, that's the same thing. And check this out. You can run if for whatever reason, chances are you'll be using something like MySQL. But it is just to know that it's capable, right? It's possible. You can run SQL Server now on Linux.
We had a talk a year or so ago about SQL Server on Linux. The presentation, he went in and demoed some things. I think I have that on the videos. So.
Okay, cool. And then when you think about monitoring and insights and identity management, identity and access management, threat detection, we have some capabilities around threat detection, and even the Azure Advisor, there's a Azure Security Center offers a lot of that now. So global reach, of course, with 54 regions, right? That's all possible. Marketplace, you can get all these solutions, and even if it's this is primarily about the operating system, right? But let's say that you're on premise and you are for networking services, you're a Cisco shop, and you migrate your workloads to Azure. And by golly, you have a network device that you have been using that you already know and love. It might be let's say it's an ASR router or something like that, and that maybe that's what you're using to establish your VPN connections. When you go to Azure, we even have partners in the marketplace. You'll see with other services such as not just compute, but for networking, we have their virtual appliances in our marketplace, like the CSR 1000 Cisco virtual router, right? That you can establish. You can create VPN sessions. So you already have that appliance. You already have maybe you have what's another one? For networking or firewall. Who's the big firewall vendors nowadays? Some that you can think of.
Well, there's F5. There's a bunch.
F5, yeah, for that type. There's F5 appliances up there too. Checkpoint, yeah, like Checkpoint. You on premises, you're using Checkpoint. You can have Checkpoint firewall virtual instances there as part of your infrastructure after you migrate as well. So it's not just about the operating system. It's the whole infrastructure. And that's what's available in the marketplace from all our partners.
How about all the collaboration tools like the UCS servers that Cisco offers?
Oracle UCS servers. So is that like a virtualization platform or? Okay, so the virtualization platform, I haven't checked. I haven't looked at the marketplace specifically for those virtual appliances if they exist. But I believe anything that's that's going to be virtualization based. May not be available, just because when you think of what we offer in Azure, it's usually from the operating system up. It doesn't go, you normally don't have the ability to manage the virtualization host, for example. So that might not be something that's there. That's just me guessing without looking, but I could be wrong, and maybe we have some new features now, but normally things like that wouldn't be available, because then you're digging down too deep into the infrastructure layer at that point. Right, so GDPR compliance. Okay, I'm not a specialist in the security stuff. Besides, a long time ago taking that CISSP exam. So GDPR. What I can tell you is that we have the documentation that shows you the industry certifications that we have, whether it's FISMA or HIPAA, and we. Last time I checked, I think we have the largest scope of third-party compliances and certifications than any other provider. So I'm sure GDPR is in there somewhere. Ubuntu support, just like we have Red Hat support, right, is integrated now from images that you can launch in Azure. And we talked a little bit about reserved instances already. So it's going to be 1 or 3 year, and you select your data center and your virtual machine size, and then you're off. So it's just one of the methods we use for discounting your workloads. And talking about cost, you can also monitor your cost. So we have some really good integrated features in the portal now, some capabilities to monitor your workloads and even set thresholds. So you can say, okay, if my spending, if you're doing a chargeback model or a showback model, you can keep track of the spending per department or project or infrastructure. And you can even add these arbitrary tags to the different resources that you want to monitor, so you can organize it how you prefer. Okay, so some more stories. I think we're coming to the end. Hitachi, an OpenShift, right? Game Insight. Okay, this might be, some of these may not ring a bell, but Hitachi was certainly rang a bell, and I won't go through these. Daimler, that's a good one. Daimler, Tomcat, Docker, Red Hat Enterprise, SUSE Linux, so a lot of open source stuff going on there. DevTest Labs, that's a way you can, that's an easier way to manage your resources in a DevTest environment. So we have DevTest Labs, for example, that you can create in Azure, and you can more easily apply policies such as, okay, for my development staff, I don't want them to be able to create in total more than 3 virtual machines, right? Or 10 virtual machines if they're large staff. And the location, you don't want them to be placing stuff outside of the U.S. geopolitical region, for example, and so on and so on. It's sort of like management policies, but you have, but you have those features. You have more features available when you use DevTest Labs as opposed to just using just a regular subscription in virtual machines and decide to call it DevTest in a certain resource group.
Can you leverage the DevTest Labs in a sort of like a CI/CD type of, agile?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, that's another
DevOps flow type thing.
Yes, you can. As a matter of fact, DevTest Labs has these extensions that you can automatically integrate. Like when you spin up a machine.
You have something that's in dev and you think it's ready for testing, and then you can stage it and migrate
Yes.
that process to go into production.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you have more options when it comes to DevTest Lab for integrating with like CI/CD pipelines as well. You can build that right into the images you deploy them within DevTest Labs. I'll just go through these quickly, but just customer stories. I won't go through the details. You'll have a copy of the slides, so I'll just get to the end. Visualization data, Power BI, analytics, and is that the end? I think that's the end.
All these pictures always have happy people in front of computers.
They're
never frustrated. They're never frazzled. They're just.
But they might not even be engineers. Maybe they're maybe they're just actors.
They're the project managers. They're just like, you guys work all weekend.
They're models. They're models. That's what they are. So if you're a good-looking person, maybe consider doing that too. You'll be part of our next slide.
So one thing this makes me think about. So there was a book that came out maybe 5 years ago or so called The Big Switch, and it sort of drew parallels between the electrical power grid and like where computing is going.
Uh-huh.
So in the early days of electricity, lots of companies made generators, and they sold generators to different companies that wanted to have electrical power. So they would argue the benefits and capabilities of their generators, and people would buy generators and run them locally, and they'd have power. Then when generation became centralized and distribution became apparent, it became ubiquitous. You just plugged into the wall now. You no longer thought about where the power was coming from or
Right.
What the capabilities were. But there was trust involved too. And the thing that strikes me is like I can still put some security in my home or on my equipment. Like I do trust that when I plug in, power's going to be there, but at the same time I have circuit breakers, I have fuses, I have things to protect me from power spikes, or if somebody tries to corrupt the power grid, there's things I can do. There's so much trust involved, and this is true of Amazon or any of them. There's so much trust involved in cloud computing. Like if you
key
enable
management and everything else.
Well, if you're enabling serial console access to the virtual machines that are running, that's like physical access to the box. You have physical access to the box. The other thing that involves a lot of trust is the underlying infrastructure that's providing the virtualization environment that's hosting all my workloads. How open are the cloud providers to independent audits of what they're doing, or
So the certifications I spoke of before, those are third-party entities that come in and audit and they certify. We don't have a relationship that could be construed as anything else. So yeah, that's how all the providers get certified.
That's an important point though, because those audits are part of that trust. Yeah.
But I'm saying, but you're just assuming, you no longer have control of your systems and
you're trusting those third-party auditors is basically what you're doing.
You don't have locked doors and physical security that you control. You're now, it's all farmed out. So
those third-party auditors, by the way, aren't they the same one that would certify your environment locally on premises?
So it would depend, right? Like, I mean, I work with a lot of military or government customers. There's things that are never going to go to the cloud, but they're just never going to.
Oh, and we acknowledge that, and And so that's a good point. So the things that can go, we have other services. So Azure Stack, for example, is a scaled down version of the cloud in your own data center. And the integration points to utilize it from on-premises is just a matter of the endpoint and a few parameters, right? So you can build a solution in, let's say for whatever reason you're not ready to adopt the public cloud. If you had a solution like that, you could do a lot of things that you could do in the cloud.
Or hybrid
It's
cloud
safe.
type of thing.
Well, that hybrid is actually a different use case. Now, I'll touch on that next.
Okay.
But yeah, if thinking about Azure Stack, right? You can leverage many of the resources and the capabilities we have in the public cloud, while still preserving the privacy that or for compliance reasons, right? You can still do that. And you know what? When let's say in the future, at some point, you'll reevaluate your decision and say, you know what, this service, we know how we can make it safe. We have the controls in place, Key Vault, whatever. We're gonna phase in moving these pieces into the public cloud. You can easily do that from an Azure Stack local platform because it's so tightly integrated. It's pretty much the same. It's the same ARM templates. It's the same everything except for you're just going to switch endpoints and a few parameters when you configure it. Another reason why that's beneficial for some customers, if they want to adopt the cloud technology, but maybe they need a bigger incubation period, ramp up time for their staff to get comfortable and familiar with the technology. Azure Stack, it's all on premises. You're not hurting any, you're not ramping up cost, as much cost as if you had a public cloud instance of the same things. And so that gives you the assurance. And then when they're ready to do something similar, now we're ready. We don't have any compliance restrictions, but we just wanted to kick the tires first on premises where it's safe. It's not going to incur cost, because you can have some developer or some infrastructure person that might accidentally, because they're learning, you might make these mistakes that may be costly if it's in the public cloud. So you have that sort of safety net. Eventually, they can start gradually migrating and transferring their resources from on-premises to Azure. So you have that feature. And then, Mark, about the question with the hybrid connectivity. For hybrid connectivity, we have about 3 different options. As an enterprise, assume you're an enterprise, and the bandwidth and the reliability are extremely important to you, then we have express route circuits that you can establish between your on-premises data center to a certain Azure region, right? You would talk to your ISP, your provider, if it's AT&T or wherever the providers are out there, and then you pay them a fee, and there's some cost on our side as well, but you get the benefit of anything that egresses from our data centers. Normally there's a cost associated with it, but when you use express route, that you don't have to worry about that. But overall, it's more costly because you're getting a wider bandwidth and better reliability, because those are usually dual circuits. That's one option for hybrid connection. Another option, if you're small scale or just as an individual, if you want to test these hybrid scenarios, right, you can create what is called a site-to-site VPN tunnel. It's an IPsec tunnel. You can create that as long as on premises you have something to do that with, and you can use virtual appliances. I've done that in my home lab using Sophos UTM, and you can probably, I've never tried it yet, but I'm thinking about in the future changing out to pfSense. So you just need a virtual appliance that support those VPN technologies for IPsec tunnels, and you can do something like that as well. And then the third option is as an individual, your laptop, you can establish a point-to-site connection with your Azure gateway. So you can reach in, and you could do all three. They can coexist at once, just for a little bit more reliability. What if there's something that, chances are nothing's going to happen to your express route circuits just because it's redundant. But let's say there's a single point of failure in that path somewhere, and it does. You can fail back to the VPN, the IPsec tunnel. If you wanted your administrators, your engineers to tie in directly, or right now all you have is a VPN tunnel, but it's not working for whatever reason, you can have your administrators use the point-to-site connection from their laptops, and they can just go right into the environment in Azure. And the other point, so Rich also brought up something about the serial console. Yes, it's an exposure. You're exposing the footprint a little bit, but it's not there by default. As the administrator, the cloud administrator, you can decide to disable the serial connection. So it's really in your control.
Because I guess the other thing with trust though is, so like the Supermicro hack is so bad, right? And a lot of cloud providers were hit by that. If you guys aren't familiar,
Maybe.
I mean, there were micro chips.
Supermicro, Apple, Amazon, and China all came out to say that it didn't actually happen.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Because they said the chips are on the boards.
So Amazon posted their security, the CISO, Steve Schmidt. It's on the Amazon security blog.
He said they weren't affected.
So they deny it.
Basically, the first paragraph is, we've contacted Bloomberg multiple times over the last couple of months. This is incorrect. Here is all of the incorrect parts of this story.
So it's fake
Okay.
news.
Maybe. I don't know. And truthfully,
Well,
like, who knows?
I guess
That's
the
a
question,
couple
it
years
gets
ago.
back to
But
trust.
you're right. It is
If-
entirely possible.
If I'm using a cloud provider
Science
and they,
fiction.
and they break
So
my
it's
heart,
possibility.
They
okay?
break your heart?
Yeah,
Okay.
like, you know, I'm compromised in some way.
Right.
Do you guys have the reverse service with the data box? Like if I had 100 terabytes of data on Azure and I'm like, I want it back.
It's an import-export service, so it goes both ways.
Okay, so you guys would send me a box that I could then get all my data back. But what's the guarantee that it's gone from your system, I guess? How do
The
I-
guarantee that it's gone? You mean, what's the...
If you send me my data, I don't want you having any more copies of it.
Okay, so even if we have the copies of your data, we can't access it. The reason is, when you transfer the data initially from on-premises, it's secured with your encryption key. We don't have access to that.
Okay.
So even if we wanted it, we couldn't get it.
Okay. Not easily. I mean, you have these data centers. You could try to break it, right?
SRM./star, and then
that's
wait
more
a
like-
million years for it to go through
It's
all
more
of
like
it.
building a trust relationship, because it's like in your facilities, you don't know if the person you hire to support your network at some point is gonna break.
I know.
Well, and I'll just tell you another example. So let's say you're doing Azure backup or Azure site recovery. So let's assume it's backup. That's a simpler scenario. So you have your machines that you're backing up on premises. You're going to back it up and send it to Azure in a recovery services vault. That recovery services vault, when you set it up, you're going to get the private key. You and only you will have the private key for the corresponding public key that will encrypt the data in transit to HTTPS when you send it up, when it streams
Right.
through, right?
So
So
the
that's
iron key.
A.
Yeah.
So there's no way we can get that data.
Goes
anymore.
back to a strong key management process.
Right.
Yeah.
And then at rest, in addition to the private-public key pair to secure that data in transit, when you set up backup, you are required to specify a passphrase. That passphrase will encrypt your data at rest, even before it gets up there to Azure. And only you know that passphrase after all.
So in that process, once you guys get the those boxes, those iron keys, who's in charge of uploading the data? Is
We
it
are.
Like us?
We'll connect it and upload it to your storage account that you have in Azure. The storage account, by the way, it's one big 500 terabyte account that you get.
Mhm.
That's part of a storage cluster. So physical, stamps. A stamp is probably 1,000 servers or so. So it's a scale unit, storage scale unit, and there's redundancy built into the stamps. And with a storage account nowadays, if you're using managed storage, your hard drives, when you create an image in Azure, the hard drives are actually spread across multiple, like for different virtual machines. It would be, even if it's one storage account, well, for the managed disk, it's no longer a single storage account, but you could have, those drives could be backed by different storage accounts in different clusters to give you even more redundancy.
Yeah, and I guess, I don't want to be too pedantic about it, but when you think about trust, like the Spectre meltdown issues, that affects all operating systems because
Right.
it's an issue at the chip level. So if there is a bad actor in a cloud provider, as an example, they could run jobs to discover what's in memory on various machines within their own infrastructure.
Wireless decrypted is what you're getting.
Well,
Inside the chip.
they're
you know,
seeing
it-
the memory pages that the
Yeah,
kernel's accessing.
right,
Like they're
yeah.
just seeing memory pages, so they could discover. So, you know, when I have my own internal data center, I know who I hire. I mean, there's a level of trust there, but I know who the people are or have some knowledge of it. But when I use Amazon or Azure, or
Out of your
Google,
control.
then it's all out of my control. Like there's just a real large level of trust.
Right. Right.
You know.
So does your security staff spend $1 billion every year on security initiatives?
I hear what you're saying. I'm just saying there's still a level of trust. And when you think of
Right.
like electrical power, there's things I can do to protect myself, but I can't really. There's not as I guess many things I can do. You know, once I'm on somebody else's data center.
You have to, okay, and that's a trade. That is a trade-off. You have to, you have to be willing.
It's a cost benefit thing.
It's cost benefit, but think of this trade-off. On premises, if there was one word you asked me to describe what you have on premises that you may not have in the cloud, maybe it's what, control? You have complete control, yeah, the whole stack, right? When you deploy or when you decide to migrate or provision your instances in Azure, you're trading some degree of control up to the operating system level for the benefit of maybe agility, right? Because then there's a lot less things you have to worry about, a lot less things you have to manage. The less things you have in life is the less things you have to manage, right? You don't have to worry about the operating, you don't have to worry about the redundancy. You don't have to worry about, okay, I'm going to deploy 3 servers as part of a web farm. Let me make sure when I go to my data center that each server is hosted on a different host in a different rack to alleviate a single point of failure, like top-of-rack switches failing, for example. You don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about that. You know why? Because it's automated. The Azure Fabric does that for us and for you automatically. So there's less you have to manage, and so that's the threshold. That's where the different scenarios come in. You have to decide, okay, at what point, how much trust do I want to relinquish for the sake of better agility and less overall potentially cost, especially capital cost, plus for less overall effort of administration. So those are the questions you have to ask yourself.
And I'm under the assumption that you guys also perform internal audits, and I wonder if you have a process to provide your clients upon those type of procedures with a log, like audit log.
Well, when it comes to what we do offer is in the complete stack. You can even do packet tracing now, right? We offer the complete capability for our customers to do their own internal auditing. There's probably some internal auditing. I mean, Microsoft security. We still monitor. So in other words, we still like intrusion detection and
Could a
our
client run
cybersecurity.
something like Splunk on their instances?
Yes, I think Splunk is one of our partners, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so you do,
Or something like that?
Yeah, you have we have literally thousands. We have thousands of partners. So chances are, whatever you're using on premises, it's probably if they've been around long enough, if they're reputable, chances are they're one of our partners too that you can use. So we'd rather give you the capability to audit yourself. We still do some auditing on our part. I don't know the details on that and how it works and to what level. But we have our own, security staff that's always I know we do in fact monitor for things like intrusion detection on your behalf. Plus there's the Azure Security Center. Some of that is automated and backed by machine learning algorithms that looks at patterns and, okay, how can you be in New York and Paris at the same time coming in from, connecting to your subscription, unless maybe you RDP to a machine in your Paris state, and things like that. So we look for anomalies and our hybrid capabilities for Azure Active Directory, and as part of the Security Center, we offer those features as well. So yeah, we do auditing. I just can't give you the details on how much and to what extent, but we definitely give you the capability to order as much as you want at whatever level you need to. All right, so are there any more questions?
When can we do Amazon versus?
You're asking the wrong person. You're asking the wrong person because
a different question,
Uh-huh.
but similar to that. Do you guys? Is there any desire in the industry to have interconnectivity between the different providers.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like, do you provide high-speed backbones between Azure and AWS, or Azure and GCP, or GC, like
Probably not directly with Azure or Amazon, but you could probably pay someone who has direct connect and
Hosted
Azure's-
both clouds, in other words.
Azure's,
Yeah.
because it seems like
The
you
user
don't
would
necessarily,
do it.
you don't necessarily want to put all your
Customer.
eggs in one basket, right? Like you spend $1 billion on security, they spend $1 billion. Amazon spends $1 billion on security, like everybody. But
$2 billion.
We're
Your
not.
costs
So
are gonna
we're.
be involved
That's a
there,
great
yeah.
point. I'm gonna need some water for this.
listen, as
Stalling.
compute becomes a utility, you're going to expect more regulation and oversight and things like that. And it's
Right.
got to be more interchangeable. It can't just be,
Well, we have the regulations again by virtue of those certifications from third parties. But to address the question of maybe a customer understandably doesn't want vendor lock-in, right? We're not naive. We know that there are customers out there that for whatever reason may decide, you know what, I'm going to adopt cloud technology. It makes sense. The principles are
Well, I'll
great.
give you a real world example.
Mhm.
DreamWorks or Pixar, I forget which one, but we work with them as a customer. They actually have software that runs on a continuous basis. When they're rendering movies, and rendering a 3D animated movie takes an enormous amount of resources. They're constantly looking at what the latest price structure is across multiple cloud providers and then choosing the cheapest one at that time to do their workload.
Right.
So they're just throwing things out as needed and constantly, doing the arbitrage on what the best one is. So.
And that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that's perfect. And who doesn't want lower cost services, right? Whoever your provider is it Verizon, Fios, or is it Comcast? So you have to. Any customer has to weigh those options. And so we're not naive. We know that some customers may even want to say, we don't want to be locked in. Let's use maybe AWS for DevTest stuff, and then for production workload, we're going to go with Azure, or vice versa, or include GCP in the mix. Whatever the case is, we realize, we understand that, and we even support it. So, for example, we talked about Azure Site Recovery. Not only can you recover, or not only can you migrate your workloads from on-premises to Azure, but if you're in a different cloud, you can do the same thing, right?
So if I'm an Azure customer, I can tell you guys, migrate all my data to my Amazon account.
That part might have to be orchestrated on the AWS side based on what services they have that resemble what we offer as Azure
Those
Site
are the
Recovery.
kind of things that I would like to see, is where, Microsoft and Amazon have some agreement where customers can easily move data from one to the other, or, without involving the customer necessarily to facilitate everything.
Right. No, I understand the
Yeah,
concept.
normally the companies will help you migrate in, but not migrate away. They don't want.
That's
to-
exactly,
So
what's the off ramp?
You don't have to go through a third party.
Yeah.
But there's tons of them that'll
Yeah,
do that.
Premier partners will do that.
Yeah, but that could just be somebody that's getting the box, converting it to a different box and sending it to Amazon or something.
But you could request it. Yes. Because Amazon will give you the same type of box that you can just send,
Okay, so
like a moving company.
we're competitors, right? And so we offer
100%.
competitive services.
But
At
the,
one point,
but the promise of cloud computing,
Uh-huh.
I understand your competitors,
Right.
but the promise of cloud computing is like the power grid, like it's ubiquitous, you don't necessarily care
right.
who you're using or when or, what the.
Ideally, yeah, in an ideal world, ideal state, that should be the case. It shouldn't, because as it's going to be, what is it? It's like security. You have the offensive and defense, and then it's like so. Competition is the same way. So generally speaking, we offer pretty much the same services. The top providers is going to be at similar cost, right? Maybe one point in time, one provider might be lower cost than the other, and they may offer more features or better reliability. But all of those characteristics they're in a state of flux at any one time. So having a customer having multiple providers, that's totally understandable, and we support that. But
My favorite thing right now is watching the different emails that'll come from Azure and Amazon, or Microsoft and Amazon, regarding their cloud stuff. One week, Amazon will announce a thing, the next week, Azure will announce the same thing, the next week, Azure announce a thing, A week after that, Amazon announced. They're
The
running
competitors.
neck and neck, and that's good.
Yeah.
Truthfully, that's good because you're getting competition in the cloud, which is competition is always better.
Azure is pretty close to being fully FedRAMP certified, or they already are.
Oh, it is.
I think.
It is.
Yeah.
At least at different
Yeah,
levels.
so
Different
that together
levels,
with-
yeah.
and
They also
AWS.
Azure has a good program where they provide you a packet. If you want to get your application certified, they give you all the controls that they've already taken care of, or
Right. Yeah.
you know, so that you just have to do the delta. It's not as much work.
Okay. Anything else? How are we doing on time?
We're
Good.
cool on time. It's 11:40 right now, so we're good. We can close down now. If you wanted to show one of the demos or have something to demo, you can be free to do that, or you've already pointed to the links on YouTube. So either way,
Okay.
your call.
Yeah, so I have a short. What I wanted to do is just offer video, and I don't have to actually stream it. It's on my hard drive. This is from. Have you guys ever looked at Channel 9 videos? No? Okay. So this is just like a 14-minute video of Azure Sphere, just to give you an overview.
We have time for that, and we can go if you want to play it. That's fine.
Okay. So yeah, if you want to include this on the stream.
Okay.
that's-
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I would include it in the stream.
And regarding Azure Stack with Cisco, they do have UCS.
They do?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. They said once they opened the door to open source, they are now in the game versus AWS. I mean, the fact that they have 54 regions available versus GCP that offers 16 and AWS has 17,
18.
18.
Making sure
Yeah, that's a big plus.
not including the closed off regions.
They had a men's group at my church. I just kept the name tag on.